Hello everyone, lovers of a world where war lasts forever. It's time for a story about the 5 chapters of Spacemarines. Let's speculate on what chapters might be in the lore, and how the events surrounding their betrayals might unfold. Let's start perhaps with the first, with the traitors of the human race from the chapter of Salamander. How is that possible? Salamanders didn't betray at all, you think, but that's not entirely true. In fact, the most elite of them did. The heirs of the chapter of Salamanders possessed a peculiar gene seed defect. Every member of the chapter experienced and felt sadness when ordinary Imperial citizens suffered at the hands of the Imperium. Yes, the Salamanders were let down by their own humanity. They betrayed because they couldn't believe that the Imperium could treat its citizens so horribly. The Salamanders founded a cult of a new Prometheus, and declared to the world that the Imperium was an ironic machine that must be destroyed. More than the Imperium, they hate Khorne and everything associated with him. While still loyal, they often killed World Eaters, once during the defense of one of the hive worlds in Segmentum Obscurus. And it was the 8th Black Crusade. They fought under one of the Inquisitors. In the process, they not only realized that the Inquisitor didn't care about humans, causing the deaths of millions, but also clashed with the forces of the World Eaters, led by Khorne himself, who in the process gained the skull of the Primarch of the chapter of Salamanders, Vulcan. After 2,000 years of brilliant feats, they pursued the dark apostle of the Word Bearers, who was gathering forces for a new Black Crusade of Abaddon. The Word-bearers slaughtered and hanged anyone who refused to take the side of chaos. When the Salamanders arrived on the planet, they found it in ruins with millions of civilian casualties. From such lawlessness, the chief librarian of the chapter, Imogen, experienced a powerful vision of pain and horror that changed his entire life. Understandably, the chapter began to persecute heretics in the warp, where he safely disappeared. Nearly 1,000 years had passed. No one thought any of the Salamanders had survived. But suddenly a new chapter of Chaos Warriors emerged from the warp and began to wreak havoc. Magic runes now covered their armor, and the warband was commanded by the former chief librarian. He had founded the cult of the new Prometheus and was teaching the masses that it was time to stop fighting the Imperium. The Imperium had already declared the chapter to be traitors and now pursued its members through Ordo Malleus and Ordo Hereticus. The Salamanders are very fond of flamethrowers, have armaments, and keep a lot of ordinary people on their payroll, cultists who are happy to work for the warband. They're also very fond of the Emperor. And who do they worship, you ask? Well, they have a cult of the new Prometheus, but in general they worship chaos. It's time for the second place. The traitors of the Raven Guard known as the Dust Lords, the Dust Knights. They served the Imperium well in their time, using their claws and jump packs like many Space Marines of the Progenitor chapter. Another entertaining trick of the Dust Lords was the use of bird-like racers in chapter to reach their targets quickly and successfully. In the Dust Lords' homeworld, they were used for navigation. But later, the chapter decided to use them on other planets as well. Of course, the Dust Lords kept their love for the Xenos a secret. There were, of course, those who could slander them to the Inquisition, but such snitches were ignored, considered liars, because the reputation of the chapter was very good. So why were they excommunicated and branded heretics? It's a mystery shrouded in darkness. If you ask the Inquisition, that's what they'll tell you. In fact, at the beginning of the first millennium, a planetary outpost on the edge of Segmentum Ultima, near the Ghoul stars, stopped communicating. The neighboring planet Asilus received only one message. All is ashes. Sounds like the slogan 1,000 suns, doesn't it? That's pretty much what the Imperium decided when they sent the Dust Lords to investigate the case. Who better to trust with the ashes than the Lords of the Ashes? When the chapter reached the planet, it turned out that the planetary defense forces had been defeated, and everything around it was in ruins. After searching the outpost, the Dust Lords found no trace of the 1,000 Suns warband, but they did find several hundred armed civilians in the Great Hall. Amusingly, no one greeted the Dust Lords as saviours. The survivors started firing on them with all their guns, to which the Dust Lords didn't care. Eventually, Captain Prowl declared the survivors heretics and ordered them to open fire on them. Within minutes, armed men, women, old men and children were slaughtered. Standing knee-deep in blood, the Space Marines realized they had made a mistake. None of the dead were susceptible to warp damage. But why were they shooting? The answer was at the far end of the hall. Where the corpses of civilians lay, the same message kept repeating. "When we return, we will take everything you hold dear. You can try to defeat us, but you will fail. You will fall. It's predestined." Do you know whose voice that was? Captain Prowl. The recording device that played the voice back recognized its owner, and later it turned out to be a transmitter. The message was that the betrayal of the Dast Lords was predetermined. When the Imperium heard about the battle, they were immediately excommunicated and declared traitors. Their homeworld was destroyed by the Rhinoceros chapter. Their monastery was destroyed, and all of their battle brothers were killed. The Rhinoceros fighters stated in their report that they found no signs of chaos corruption in the Dast Lord's monastery. However, the Inquisitor who was with them insisted that they were traitors. Moreover, the Rhinos added in the report that this chapter had never been particularly prominent, but was very loyal to the Emperor. Now, a warband of Dast Lords wanders the warp to find a way to counter their downfall. Interestingly, the Dast Lords traitors are a pretty big gang, 400 Space Marines ready to slash and smash. What's more, in fact, the Lords can replicate themselves with a temporal anomaly. Thus, there could be 5 or 7 Prowl captains alone. A very murky story that makes it seem as if they weren't traitors at all. It's time to talk about the third traitors, the chapter known as the Frost Ghosts. The chapter originally suffered from a horrible mutation that caused Space Marines' body temperature to drop dramatically and cryogenic fluid to accumulate in their lungs. Therefore, on the battlefield, they could literally freeze their enemies with their breath. However, they were vulnerable to heat. In short, the best opponents for the chapter of salamanders. The Frost Ghosts were initially vulnerable to the temptation of the warp, and began to worship the mysterious Heims, local cold creature, the spawn of winter and their god. Who this even is an unknown even to the gods of chaos. According to the mad Capellan Marcus, Heims feeds on the souls of the dead. Only really powerful demon lords and living saints can oppose him. Basically, Heims is such a small, unknown god of chaos who endows his followers with different powers. Say, for example, he gave Marcus unnatural longevity and strength, and then made him his avatar, and he's great with demons. He once sucked all the strength out of the supreme demon Khorne and became even more badass. Due to the fact that the Frost Ghosts worshipped the new god of chaos, they were often hired as warbands. There was no way they could have survived otherwise. We had to get weapons, armor, and food from somewhere. In the process, the Space Marines proved themselves to be excellent stormtroopers. Capellan Marcus was responsible for the worship of Heims in the chapter, but there were those in the chapter who remained loyal to Rogel Dawn and the Emperor. They were the descendants of Imperial Fists. The one who decided to turn away from worshipping Heims was Captain Ericus, after which he lost his powers and began to age rapidly. Interestingly, the Imperium as a whole didn't understand how to treat the Frost Ghosts because there was no evidence implicating them in heresy. There were, of course, many rumors surrounding them, and so the Imperium was constantly making requests to the chapter. "Come, we'll talk, you'll stand trial, we'll decide what to do with you." Captain Ericus believed that all these requests were Escobar's theorems. No one deserves his loyalty because the High Lords of Terror actually used the Emperor's name to indulge their desires. And he just hates chaos. By the way, do you know where the homeworld of the Frost Ghosts was? It was on the destroyed world Eldari Star, which is a small shipworld that the Frost Ghosts took over in the early days of their founding. It's actually practically empty, because there are too few Space Marines to fill it. The world ship, however, serves as a great place of worship for Heims, who, I'll remind you, loves the souls of the dead. After the resurrection of Robut Guilliman, a rift began within the ranks of the Frost Ghosts. Those who were loyal to the Emperor said that the return of the Primarch meant that it was time to become loyalists, because soon Rogel Dawn would be back, and it wouldn't look good in his eyes. In the end, Ericus supported the loyal Frost Ghosts, and a civil war broke out in the chapter, Ericus versus Marcus. Hymes, of course, looking at this, fit in as well and took Ericus' power away from him, giving it to Marcus. When it smelled fried, Ericus ordered the loyalists to take what they could and run. They then set off on a redemptive crusade, constantly informing Robute Guilliman that they were loyal and ready to prove it. Meanwhile, the rest of the Frost Ghosts are still on the ship and have gone completely over to the side of Chaos. They even gave up the name and now call themselves the heirs of Hymes. In short, it's an ambiguous situation. But at the same time, part of the chapter is still loyalists. The fourth chapter is the chapter of the Chaos Forces, known as the Thousand Suns. This is the most amusing chapter at all, which violently advocates for the Emperor and only for him. Their mission is to bring to light the atrocities and lies of the Inquisition that has taken over the Imperium, and to punish those who believe it. The Hellbird Fortress Monastery suddenly opened fire on an Imperium cruiser that was flying by. Later, the Thousand Suns attacked the world of Tartarus I and took it over very quickly, spreading the truth about the Inquisition and the current Imperium everywhere. At some point, the Imperial Navy gathered forces to deal with the nasty heretics, and that's 5 regiments of well-equipped guardsmen and a siege regiment to boot. They arrived at Tartarus I. The Imperials realized that the planet was well fortified, and the battle would not be easy. Nevertheless, after losing a huge number of fighters, the Imperium did begin to gain the upper hand in the seeming conflict. After several hours of fierce fighting, the Imperium began to overwhelm the Space Marines. Strange situation, thought the generals. These are Space Marines. There are quite a few of them. Why are they retreating at all? The answer was soon answered. A traitor battle barge had struck at the rear of the Imperial fleet. Having defeated the enemy in the skies, the Thousand Suns descended on the planet in their landing pods and killed every Imperial Guard fighter who was clamoring for the Empire. The Space Marines used all the armaments from the Imperium's battle barges and ground troops to bolster Tartarus I's planetary defense force, just in case the Imperium suddenly decided to make a comeback. Understandably, the chapter was not alone there. They recaptured their homeworld in Vectis Prime and continued to fight the Imperium, while fighting off the Tyranids and other creatures in parallel. The locals of nearly every planet often honored the chapter as heroes, and that bothered the Inquisition greatly. But the Thousand Suns didn't care. They even teamed up with local regiments of the Imperial Guard and Navy to survive the onslaught of chaos. Interestingly, the Thousand Suns have borrowed some excerpts from the Codex Astartes, but still consider it an unnecessary book that limits what they can do in combat. Their battle barge Thursbringer is simultaneously their fortress monastery because it's much easier to fly. The recruitment is also interesting. A crowd of neophytes are sent with simple equipment into the forests where they must work together. Those who survive come back. They get "We do not lie" written on their backs, after which everyone swears allegiance to the Emperor and only him for that. And in battle, the Thousand Suns destroy all those who serve the Inquisition and the High Lords of Terror. But they still adore the Emperor and try to protect and enlighten the common people. It's time to talk about the 5th chapter of Traitors, the Dark Angels, and specifically about one of their chapters called the Manticores. What happened to them? Why were they classified as heretics? The thing is that they really took the blame themselves and they were declared traitors. It happened at the end of the 40th millennium. The first company, called Deathwing, received information that the fallen angel Saphir was seen on the icy world of Jalor. Understandably, the chapter immediately sent a squad of veterans to the planet to find and punish all the fallen. After a week of searching, of course, they found no one. The information was very strange and sketchy. The fact is that Cypher's pursuit eventually led to a clash between Deathwing and the Inquisitors of Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Xenos, as well as a squad of Death Guard. When asked what is the Deathwing doing on Jalor, those simply fled the planet. The Inquisitors immediately launched a pursuit. In the end, the Manticores were declared heretics and decided to destroy them. They were only lucky because one of the Death Guard was a Dark Angel. He immediately sent a message to the chapter's Supreme Master Azrael and explained the situation. He said that he appreciated the chapter for its loyalty and was ready to help them in any situation. This, of course, did not help them much. Manticores was excommunicated from the Imperium anyway, but they still defended in hopes of redeeming themselves someday. They generally maintain the structure of the chapter and do not follow the Codex Astartes. Neither do the other Dark Angels. After they became traitors, they increased the number of recruits. In fact, the Manticores, even as traitors, have been successful in hunting down the Fallen. Say, during the siege of Fortress Vorok, they discovered that the leaders of the local Chaos forces were fallen. Upon arrival on the planet, they joined forces with the Black Knights and with surgical precision killed the leaders of the rebellion 3 fallen Dark Angels, who were eventually handed over to the Black Knights. Those, in return, allowed them to finish off the rebels on the planet and take all the laurels for themselves. Their stronghold monastery is located in the star fort Unstoppable Fury. It is from there that they fight the other traitors. Interesting list of not quite betrayed. All the stories you've heard from me are nothing more than fiction or near truth. It's up to you. Happy April Fool's Day, my listeners, and stay strong.